then I can still take calls relative to that person in the evening or whatever. But normally there will be several physicians that will rotate the call so that you don't have to be on call all the time. And that's important for the emergency surgeries because there can be a stretch of time when there might be emergency surgeries that need to be done every night. And so if the same person was on call every night, then just the physical tiredness becomes a factor in being able to deliver good care. So, but typically if I'm on call, it'll be starting in the morning and going through the night till the next morning, and that's usually the call schedule. And then during the daytime is the scheduled things that are not on call, where it's just a planned surgery or a planned office visit that's that I have on the calendar. And so those things, we try not to interrupt those. But even that, if an emergency comes in, we sometimes have to cancel the other patients to say, well, we have to take care of this emergency first.
Mm-hmm. So even in your being a surgeon and you're performing surgery and different things, have you ever been called to oversee a surgery from other surgeons? Or
I occasionally get called to assist another surgeon. In other words, someone will say, well, I'm having trouble with this surgery, or this surgery is a little bit out of my area of expertise. Can you come and help me with it? And so then I'll break away from what I'm doing to go help another surgeon if I'm able to. And that's not rare. And that goes both ways. I'll occasionally call someone else and say, this is a difficult situation. Can you come in and help me? And another surgeon will come and help me. So, we help each other out.
So as a gastrologist surgeon, is that because someone has cancer and you're performing surgery on them, or just because they're in the emergency room because of stomach problems and you have to perform surgery?
Okay, so how this works is that when a person comes to the emergency department, then the emergency room physician will evaluate them first and decide if they can take care of the problem. And then if they determine that the patient needs surgery, then they have a list of who they can call that does which types of surgery. So, for instance, if a person has a strangulated hernia, they would call me for that.
Okay.
But if a person has a broken leg, they would call the orthopedic surgeon. So it's up to the emergency room doctor to understand who's going to take care of which type of patient, and then they would make that call to get the right surgeon to come in.
So have you ever had people that knew you were at the Worcester Hospital and recommended you as their surgeon for your profession?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's normal in a community, that people will have certain doctors that they know and certain, and who they work with, and or who a relative went to, and, if they like this one or like that one better. Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who normally don't like doctors or hospitals, but they need surgery, but for some reason or another, they're fearful of it? What would you tell someone who's in that situation?
Well, I meet people like that actually fairly often because with most of our surgical diseases, when it gets to the point of really needing the surgery, people recognize that something has to be done. So this is a person who maybe had a hernia for a long time and they were just ignoring it, but then it becomes strangulated, and now they're vomiting and they're having severe pain, and they show up at the hospital. And so it's not, at that point, it's not a question of them saying, no, I think I'd rather not. It's more of a thing of saying, I've avoided this for a long time because I really don't like doctors, but I know I'm going to die if I don't do something. And so then they call me. And really for most of those people, once I sit down and talk to them and explain the process, it sort of puts their mind at ease. And that's usually not such an issue anymore.
Well, that's good. That's awesome. What is some of the, what advice could you give us in maximizing our health to make sure that, I know you mentioned about eating properly and exercising, but even for someone who has physical problems and they may not be to that extent. And again, like you said before, that they may overlook their physical problems. So what advice would you give to someone who, or maybe you can't, someone who refused to go or refused to seek medical attention?
Well, I'm going to sort of take the politician route on this a little bit, because I think that the first thing that you have to say is you have to say, what are you living for? In other words, people really tend to get focused on their health sometimes, to the point where it interferes with their ability to live life. And I sometimes feel like that as Christians, as believers in God who've been redeemed and born again, we should be looking forward to what God has for us. And if that means that we're going to lay down our life and be in heaven with God, then, as Paul says, that's even better. So we can't live our life in fear. So that would be the first thing I'd say, is to know what you're living for. To say, you know what, I've given my life to Christ. He's come to live within me. I know that if I die, I'm going to heaven. And so I don't have to be afraid of that anymore. So that's number one. But number two is, if you know what you're living for, then you say, well, how healthy do I need to be able to do these things that God has called me to? Am I going to neglect my body and become so broken down and ill that I can't do the things that God wants me to do? And so if you say, well, God has called me to do this, but I can't because I'm so tired and run down, well, then maybe you need to take the steps required to fix that. Again, it's like that glass of water. If the solution for what's going on in your body is right there, and all you have to do is go and ask somebody, then to me it would make sense to address that, so that you can get on with living and doing the things that God wants you to do.
And then, too, more likely, what we feared isn't that big anyway once we face it.
Well, by ignoring your medical problems does not make them better. That we have certainly seen that. In other words, you have a symptom and you ignore it, and it gets worse and worse until it becomes disabling, and then you finally show up at the doctor, and the doctor says, well, gosh, why didn't you come in 3 years ago, and we could have prevented all of this, by getting you started on treatment at that time. So, but you have to balance that, like I said, with, what are you living for? You can't spend all of your time worrying about your health. You have to worry about what is, the things that God wants me to be doing and addressing in my life. There might even be more important things going on in your heart that's more important than what's going on in your body, and God wants to address that first. So you have to listen to him.
That's true. That's so good. So what is your advice on people who don't go for yearly exams, and they feel like, they're okay, and that if they go, they're fearful that something is going to show up in a negative light rather than seeing it as a preventive method?
Well, in my area of specialty, we don't have a lot of yearly exams. In other words, for people with breast cancer, that'll be every 6 months for the first 2 years, and then once a year after that. And so those are things that we would be checking for specifically. The yearly checkup in general medicine, involving things like your cholesterol, your blood pressure, and things like that. There's certain things like, for instance, blood pressure. You'll never know if you have high blood pressure unless someone checks it. And so that does need to be checked periodically, and there's a lot of severe complications that can happen from not treating high blood pressure, and high blood pressure is fairly easy to treat. And so that's something that, 10 years from now, when you have your kidneys fail and you're on dialysis because you never treated your high blood pressure, then you would say, well, gosh, I wish I would have had that checked. And there's a few things like that. The yearly exam is not magical. It's not as if you're going to be more healthy just because you get the yearly exam. But there's certain things that we can look for that could prevent problems later, and so that's where the prevention comes in.
So what made you go toward gastrology?
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because that's not actually what I do. What I do is called general surgery.
Okay.
And general surgery involves intestinal surgery, breast cancer surgery, thyroid surgery, skin cancer surgery. Those are mainly the things that I do. the name general surgery is sort of a leftover. It's in other words, many years ago, the general surgeon did all kinds of surgery, would set broken bones, would do any kind of surgery that was invented at that time, and that was general surgery. But then as the specialties have come along and say, well, now the orthopedic doctor does the bones, now the brain surgeon does the brain surgery, now the plastic surgeon does the reconstructive surgery, and so it's been broken up. And so, but the things that still are in general surgery now have become pretty well defined. In other words, it's called general surgery, but it's really intestinal, thyroid, breast, and skin is really what general surgery encompasses.
Wow, that's awesome. You're so great. You're just so good. So tell me a little bit about how do you deal with time or handle the time with your family in the midst of surgery and all the things that takes your time or call on your time. How do you handle that moment?
Well, that's a great lesson, because I think that this is a lesson that can apply to people in all walks of life and not just surgery. Because when I first began with this career, it was a constant struggle, because I always felt like there was not enough time for my family. It seemed like surgeries would come with emergencies at the worst possible time, and I really fretted about that a lot. And I tried to schedule things, and I would be upset if the schedule wasn't working right. And I spent a lot of mental energy being concerned with that. But the lesson that I finally learned was that just like all things in life, you have to give that to God. And so I said, okay, God, you've called me to do something. I know that you've sent these patients my way. And so whatever needs to be done, I'm going to just take care of it. And when I don't have surgeries, I can be home with my family. And when an emergency comes in, I take care of it. But either way, I give thanks to God. Mm-hmm. I say, God, I thank you that I have a chance to save this person's life today. On this other day, I say, God, I thank you that I have time to be with my family today. And whatever happens, I just give thanks. Now, sometimes we have to take steps of adjusting schedules and things. I'm not saying that I just ignore it, mm-hmm. but you can't always fix your schedule. You can't determine when emergencies are going to come up in your own life or someone else's life. And so to some extent, you just have to trust and say, all right, what do I need to take care of right now? And you take care of it.
That's good. So is that the same way as Dr. Carol? Does she operate in the same way, or?
Well, her situation is a lot different right now because of the fact that she doesn't do any on-call work. Okay. And so she is working actually at a volunteer clinic, and so she doesn't have to take any calls in the evenings for that. But on the other hand, she's also more popular for family and friends to call if they have medical issues that they need to talk to somebody. And so someone will call her, and she'll just pick up the phone, and she'll help them through whatever it is that is going on. And that's just part of it. That's, as a mm-hmm. physician, that's part of what we do. And you also have to become a little bit more wise about understanding when to tell people about how you're managing your time. In other words, the fact that someone calls me with a problem doesn't automatically make that problem a priority. And so sometimes I will say to the person, I really can't address this for you right now. You'll have to, come to my office tomorrow, and then we can talk in a lot more depth. But right now I have other things I need to attend to. Mm-hmm. And so you have to learn to in a kind way, to let people know that there is, that right now maybe is not the best time to take care of whatever it is they want taken care of.
Well, I want to say thank you very much, Dr. Sherman, for coming on to our show, and we definitely appreciate you. And I just want to thank all my listeners for tuning in to Live with Necee, and you can continue to hear from me on every Monday and Friday at 9:05. God bless you.